Patrick Machayo here, and I want to welcome you back to the second part of our Memorial Day Reflection Series as the United States approaches 250 years of independence. In the first part of this series, we spoke about sacrifice. We spoke about military families. We spoke about grief, memory, PTSD, and the emotional burden many veterans continue carrying long after the battlefield has gone quiet. We reflected on what it means to serve a nation and on the painful reality that for many families, Memorial Day is not simply another holiday. It is a reminder of somebody who never came home. Today, in part 2, I want us to go deeper because Memorial Day 2026 feels different. America is preparing to celebrate 250 years of democracy and independence. There will be fireworks, speeches, patriotic ceremonies, and celebrations all across the country in the coming weeks. Yet at the same time, the nation is also experiencing deep political polarization, institutional strain, leadership tensions, and growing public exhaustion. There is conflict overseas. There are debates about the future of democracy itself. There are tensions involving military leadership, civilian authority, and the direction of the country. And in the middle of all this stands Memorial Day, a holiday many Americans participate in, but perhaps fewer Americans fully understand. I write often about democracy, governance, leadership, and institutional strain in American society. Many of those themes appear throughout my books, The Weight of the Biden Presidency, Power, Repair, and the Strain of Governance, America at 250, Democracy at Risk, and America Under Strain, the unfinished work of American democracy. And honestly, Memorial Day touches all of those themes in ways that many people do not always immediately recognize. Because Memorial Day is not simply about war. It is about sacrifice. It is about memory. It is about national identity. And it is about the emotional relationship between a republic and the people who have carried the burden of defending it. Since 1775, America has suffered approximately 1.3 million war-related deaths. Roughly 650,000 of those deaths occurred directly on the battlefield. Those are staggering numbers when you truly stop and think about them. Entire generations shaped by conflict. Families forever changed. Communities left carrying grief for decades. And even today, the burden continues. America remains engaged in global tensions and military operations. Fewer than 20 American service members have reportedly died in the recent conflict involving Iran since late February of this year. And thankfully, the current situation appears to be under pause for now. But even a small number carries enormous weight for military families. Behind every casualty report is a mother, a father, a spouse, children, friends, and fellow service members whose lives are permanently altered. That is why Memorial Day matters, and perhaps that is also why Memorial Day 2026 should not simply pass by as another long weekend. This year, an estimated 45 million Americans are traveling during Memorial Day weekend. In many ways, that is a beautiful thing. Families reconnecting, people gathering together, friends seeing one another, cookouts, barbecues, laughter, travel, rest. There is nothing inherently wrong with any of that. Human beings need joy. Families need connection. Communities need moments of togetherness. But I think we also have to ask ourselves an honest question. How many Americans truly understand what Memorial Day is supposed to mean? How many people traveling this weekend are planning to share stories about loved ones lost in war? How many families are visiting cemeteries, How many parents are teaching their children why thousands of flags are placed quietly beside graves across the country? How many people are attending memorial ceremonies or parades, not simply as entertainment, but as acts of remembrance? And perhaps most importantly, how many Americans understand that Memorial Day and Veterans Day are not the same thing? I remember participating in Memorial Day activities at a Veterans Administration Medical Center. We were honored to have middle school students visit hospitalized and ailing veterans during the observance. At one point inside a lecture hall, I asked the students a simple question. What is Memorial Day about? Almost every hand went up immediately, and almost every student gave the same answer. To celebrate veterans. I remember gently correcting them. I explained that we celebrate veterans on Veterans Day. That is the holiday, specifically designed to honor those who served in uniform. But Memorial Day is different. Memorial Day is painful. Memorial Day is about remembering those who died in war. It is about the empty seat at the family table. It is about the son who never returned home, the daughter lost overseas, the husband buried beneath a white headstone, the friend whose laughter still echoes in memory decades later. That moment with those students stayed with me because it revealed something larger about modern American society. Many Americans have not intentionally forgotten Memorial Day's meaning. Rather, over time, the deeper emotional purpose of the holiday has gradually become blurred beneath commercial culture, long weekend habits, and the speed of modern life. And perhaps part of the reason is that modern America rarely pauses anymore. We live in an age of constant stimulation, endless news cycles, political outrage, social media arguments, notifications, work pressures, economic anxiety, emotional exhaustion. People move from one crisis to another without ever truly slowing down long enough to reflect. That is one reason I believe the national moment of remembrance at 3 p.m. on Memorial Day matters so much. For 1 minute, the country is encouraged to pause. 1 minute. 1 minute of silence in honor of the fallen. Honestly, I sometimes wonder whether America needs more moments like that. Not only because of military sacrifice, but because democracy itself requires reflection. A society that never pauses can eventually lose its emotional connection to memory, history, and responsibility. Memorial Day originally began after the Civil War as Decoration Day. Families and communities decorated the graves of fallen soldiers with flowers and flags. The origins of the holiday were deeply personal, deeply painful, and deeply human. People gathered in cemeteries not for entertainment, but for remembrance. And in many ways, I think there is something profoundly moving about that tradition. Quiet rows of graves, flags moving softly in the wind, families standing silently beside headstones, older veterans remembering friends they lost decades earlier, children asking questions about sacrifice and history. That is Memorial Day. Not simply consumerism, not simply sales promotions, not simply travel, but memory. As America approaches 250 years of democracy, Memorial Day also forces us to think carefully about the relationship between military sacrifice and the Republic itself. The United States military is not supposed to function as a partisan institution. It is a professional organization designed to serve the Constitution and civilian leadership regardless of political party. That principle matters enormously in democratic societies. And yet in recent years, many Americans have become increasingly concerned about political tensions involving military leadership, ideological disputes, and growing polarization touching even military culture itself. Senior generals have been removed or criticized amid political controversy. There have been debates about diversity initiatives, anti-woke rhetoric, military identity, and what some leaders describe as a return to combat ethos. Even military chaplain programs and broader questions of inclusion have not escaped controversy. Now, let me be very clear. This should not become a partisan argument. That is not the purpose of this conversation. Civilian control of the military is a foundational democratic principle. The military must remain subordinate to elected civilian leadership. That is essential in a constitutional republic. But at the same time, the military also depends upon professionalism, institutional trust, cohesion, and stability. Service members are expected to carry extraordinary burdens on behalf of the nation, regardless of who occupies political office. They deploy into dangerous situations. They endure long separations from family. They operate in environments most civilians will never fully understand. And so, Memorial Day 2026 also feels like an appropriate time to reflect carefully on the emotional and institutional pressures being placed upon the military itself. During the Iraq War years, Americans often said something that became part of the national conversation. I support the troops, but not the war. What we are seeing now feels different in some ways. At times, it almost feels like there are moments when political leadership strongly supports military operations while simultaneously engaging in conflict with aspects of military institutional culture itself. That tension is worth reflecting upon carefully and responsibly. Not because democracy is collapsing, not because America is doomed, but because healthy democracies require trust between institutions, leadership, service members, and the public itself. And trust, once weakened, can take a long time to rebuild. I entered the military during a very different America. The Cold War still shaped the global atmosphere. Over the decades that followed, America would experience Panama, the Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan, counterterrorism operations, and countless military deployments around the world. Entire generations of Americans have carried these burdens repeatedly. And yet, despite everything, millions of veterans continued serving honorably and professionally. Today, the United States still has roughly 16 million veterans living across the country. That is not an insignificant number. Military service continues touching American society deeply, even if many civilians feel increasingly disconnected from military life itself. And perhaps that emotional disconnect is part of what Memorial Day should help bridge. Because behind every deployment statistic are human beings. Behind every war are families. Behind every folded flag handed to a grieving family member is a story that forever altered someone's life. I also think Memorial Day 2026 arrives during a moment of enormous emotional exhaustion within American society more broadly. People are tired politically, tired economically, tired emotionally. Many Americans feel uncertain about the future. Trust in institutions has weakened. Polarization dominates public discourse. Social media amplifies outrage constantly. Families themselves sometimes avoid political conversations altogether because tensions have become so intense. And yet Memorial Day offers an opportunity to step outside that noise briefly, to remember that generations before us carried burdens far heavier than online arguments. Young Americans crossed beaches in World War II. Others froze in Korea. Others disappeared into the jungles of Vietnam. Others spent years fighting insurgencies in Iraq and Afghanistan. Many never came home at all. And perhaps the greatest way to honor them is not simply through speeches or slogans, but through trying to become a more thoughtful and responsible society ourselves. Supporting veterans matters. Addressing PTSD matters. Helping military families matters. Reducing veteran homelessness matters. Improving healthcare and emotional support matters. Listening to veterans matters. Understanding moral injury matters. Honoring sacrifice must involve more than symbolism alone. As America prepares to celebrate 250 years of independence, Memorial Day also reminds us that democracy itself is unfinished work. That phrase became central to many of my reflections. In America Under Strain, the unfinished work of American democracy. Democracy is not self-sustaining. It requires stewardship. It requires sacrifice. It requires institutions people still trust. And it requires citizens willing to remember that freedom has always carried a cost. That does not mean America is perfect. It never has been. But it does mean the Republic continues, depending upon people willing to serve something larger than themselves. That is why Memorial Day still matters. Not because America is flawless, but because sacrifice deserves remembrance. As this Memorial Day weekend unfolds and millions of Americans travel across the country, I hope people enjoy their families. I hope people reconnect with loved ones. I hope there is laughter and warmth and community, but I also hope there is reflection. I hope some families tell stories about relatives who served and never returned home. I hope children learn the difference between Memorial Day and Veterans Day. I hope more Americans visit cemeteries. I hope more people place flowers beside graves. I hope more citizens pause at 3 p.m. for 1 minute of silence. And perhaps most importantly, I hope Americans reflect seriously about the kind of republic we want to become as we approach 250 years of independence. Because ultimately, honoring the dead also means caring for the nation they died defending. My name is Patrick Machayo, and I want to thank you sincerely for joining me during this emotional time of remembrance and reflection as we continue this broader conversation about democracy, leadership, governance, institutional strain, and the future of the American Republic.